Franzheimer Marshall, a rich and arrogant man, accepted a bet that would change his existence in ways he could never have imagined. Was used to winning in business and in existence, and competition drove him. But when his comrade Jack made a bold decision, challenged during a luxurious night out in New York, Franzheimer was fascinated. Jack smiles, and I launched the challenge. Let's see if you can win, Franzheimer. I bet you wouldn't have the courage to marry a woman who doesn't fit your usual type. Franzheimer, known for dating beautiful women. The women were surprised, but still eager to prove themselves. He raised an eyebrow and asked the price with a mischievous smile. Jack raised his hand, a glass of champagne, and told the winner $1 million. But you have to marry him and at least stay married 6 months. Franzheimer feels the adrenaline of competition and the attraction of he accepted. The financial challenge, without hesitation, the woman Jack had in mind was Chloe Richards, someone he didn't want. Franzheimer didn't know her because she followed conventional beauty standards. But for him, it was just another deal to win. A few dates later, Franzheimer was given more details about Chloe, saying that she was self-confident, independent, and strong-willed, and had nothing to do with women. Franzheimer was used to it. This fascinated him even more. He was used to being in control. He wondered how he could. I would be dealing with someone who wouldn't bend his will. Their first date was at a fancy restaurant, like Chloe. When Franzheimer arrived, he immediately noticed how different she was from anyone he had ever met. The fantasy didn't seem to intimidate her. Script or by Franzheimer himself, instead she met his gaze firmly. Confidence that Franzheimer Marshall must have told Chloe directly when she sat down, and you must be Chloe Richards. Franzheimer responded with a controlled smile as he extended his hand. She hesitated just before he gripped it firmly and showed his determination. Let's not beat around the bush. Ava started her tone. I immediately know why we are here. I know the bet and the terms and conditions. Franzheimer was surprised by her openness, but he didn't show it. And you agreed to meet anyway? He asked curiously. As for her motivations, Chloe paused for a moment before responding. Let's just say I have my reasons. I'm not naive. Luke 6. The months may seem short, but a lot can change during that time. If you think you can manipulate or control me, you are wrong. Lucas smiles. Chloe proved to be more of a challenge than expected, which only made things more difficult. When she became interested in him at the end of their first date, Franzheimer became increasingly fascinated with Chloe. She wasn't like anyone he had met before. She wasn't afraid of him, and that sparked his curiosity even more. The days of amazement pass, and Franzheimer can't help but wonder how he should deal with them. In the next step, he was used to being the master of the game. But now it seemed like Chloe had her own game. Their second date took place far away, at a simple cafe, the Boom. Glamorous restaurants Franzheimer frequented suggested the place to Chloe, and Franzheimer strangely agreed that he wanted to understand who she was and why she did it, agreed to a seemingly temporary marriage when Franzheimer arrived. Chloe was already there, drinking tea. With a calm smile, she greeted him warmly, without the coldness of the first meeting, but always behaved with compassion. The same unwavering confidence that I thought you preferred 5-star restaurants, Chloe joked as Franzheimer sat down. Sometimes it's good to break the routine, replied Franzheimer, trying to sound good, casually, even though he felt a little out of place. They chatted for a while, exchanging superficial details. Chloe quickly got to the point. If we're really going to do this, I want to make a few things clear, Eva said. I put your cup of tea on the table. I don't care about your money or your luxurious lifestyle. 6 months are 6 months, and I intend to leave here in the same way I arrived. Franzheimer looked at her carefully. He knew it was her. To be honest, Chloe was the kind of woman who knew exactly what she wanted. For her, like many others, marriage was not a way to climb the social ladder. So what do you want, Eva? Franzheimer asked. freedom, genuinely curious, she replied without hesitation, "I want to. You know, even if we make this deal, I won't be controlled by you. I have my own existence, and a temporary marriage won't change that." Franz Heimer smiled. It wasn't the answer he expected, but it was. At the same time, he didn't mind giving Chloe that freedom for him. Marriage was just he wouldn't mind the formality of winning the bet if she wanted to maintain her independence. Franz Heimer accepted 6 months. After that, we separated. Chloe watched him for a moment, as if to make sure he actually agreed to the terms. She took on this challenge with a plan in mind and was determined to make sure everything went according to her plan. Deep down, she would like to know that Franz Heimer might try to manipulate the situation, but she, as he also relied on his own strength to resist their influence, the meeting ended amicably and the two left. Their roles were clearly defined. Chloe would maintain her independence and Franz Heimer to ensure that the wedding is just a formal thing, but throughout the dates, and the wedding date was approaching. Franz Heimer couldn't help but think that perhaps this game wouldn't be as easy as he expected. I imagined the wedding would be cold and unceremonious, like a carefully planned business deal. With his strategic mindset, Franz Heimer Marshall already saw himself as the winner of the bet, which he was convinced would work. The 6 months would pass quickly, and Chloe, stubborn as she was, would eventually give in to her luxurious lifestyle. I wanted to give it to her right after the ceremony. Franz Heimer brought Chloe to his massive penthouse. The heart of New York was a monument to its wealth, reflected in its enormous windows. For him, the city lights and the interior were filled with the most expensive and exclusive decoration. It was real battlefield, where he would defeat Chloe from the first moment. Thanks to the power of his material globe, Chloe made it clear that she wasn't going to back down. Once she entered the penthouse, she maintained a distant attitude. The look she gave Franz Heimer was not one of admiration, but of challenge. "Franz Heimer, no further date," she said firmly as she walked to one of the large windows. As he looked at the city, unfazed by the luxury around him, Franz Heimer smiled. Sure, he was used to it. At first, he was something of a resistance, but eventually every woman in his existence bowed to his charm and wealth. Chloe would be no different, he thought, at least in the first few meetings after marriage. I tried everything to impress. She filled him with expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and luxury, all traveling in the hope that Chloe would begin to adapt to the style of existence he dictated to her. But his frustrated, she refused everything, while Chloe insisted on keeping things simple. Humble routine, never give in to the trappings of wealth. "I don't need those things, Franz Heimer," she said with the silence, which only made him angrier, deeply disturbed him. It was Franz Heimer who always got everything he wanted. When he saw his authority challenged for the first time, it was no longer just a bet. It was now a personal matter. He had to do it. To somehow win over Chloe, he had to prove he was in control, and that's when he started acting out. Even more aggressively, he prevented her from going to work, using reasons such as, "You no longer need the salary," or "You're." My wife's role when Chloe insisted he make her wait hours to meet her, they considered important. Franz Heimer manipulated schedules, situations, everything keep control. But Chloe didn't give up. She was solid against Franz Heimer's attempts, and this only increased her desire to break him. Their relationship began to turn into a minefield of petty banter. Appeared in trivial conversations in which Chloe used harsh words to destroy all of Franz Heimer's attempts to convey feelings to her. Although Franz Heimer was outmatched or controlled on a particularly tense night, he tried a more emotional approach. "But I understand you, Ava," he said, looking at her with a mix of frustration and curiosity. "Any other woman would be happy. Try this kind of luxury, but you act like it's not enough. What do you really want, Ava?" who until then was apathetic. At that moment, he finally looked up, and they glowed with an intensity that Franz Heimer had not expected. Respect Franzheimer. I'm not a piece on your chessboard. You think you can control me with money, but you have the wrong money. It doesn't buy dignity or integrity. You can have all these things around you, but you're empty inside. And that's it. You can't take it. Your words hit you like a punch in the stomach for the first time. Like Franzheimer felt that he could be losing more than just control, and that Chloe was not only resisting his power, but also breaking the facade he had. It built up over the years and scared him. No one had ever challenged him like that. This, and the fact that Chloe looked beyond her wealth, made Franzheimer feel exposed. But instead of giving in, Franzheimer decided to tighten his grip and began making plans to isolate Chloe in order to make her, realizing that her existence would be much more difficult without him. He cut off all contact and closed the doors that could help her. She hindered her career and even sabotaged important events she was organizing. But Chloe wasn't that type. Easily intimidated by each blow, she stood up more determined than before to maintain her dignity. She refused to let Franzheimer model her, and then one night Eva played her own card. Franzheimer, you think you're in control, don't you? She said, calculated. But what you don't know is that I also have a plan. And believe me, when the time comes, you will see this whole game evolve into something much bigger than you ever were. When she first imagined Franzheimer looking at her in surprise, she realized he underestimated Chloe, and for the first time, he was afraid he wouldn't be the right person in the end. As the winner of this game, the weeks passed on a tightrope, becoming more tense with each passing date. He was ready to capture Franzheimer in his control freak and tried every possible means to manipulate him. Despite taking advantage of the situation to her advantage, Chloe continued to resist without blinking. She was like a fortress he couldn't tear down. Every attempt he made seemed to only strengthen his inner strength, but there was something Franzheimer couldn't do. He denied seeing Eve differently over time. It wasn't just a matter of A's for her resilience. It was something deeper. She did something that no other woman had done. She did. It disarmed him emotionally and left him uncomfortable and confused for the first time. There was a time when he saw her not as part of a bet or as an opponent, but as someone he desperately wanted to marry. As far as I know, Franzheimer was alone in the large living room one night, after a heated argument, watching through the city windows. The glow of the city lights gave him a feeling of power. But now everything seemed like this. He blankly wondered why he felt this way. Chloe was just a woman he had been married to for 6 months. She should have done it. She was just part of his game, nothing more. But the truth was that she was playing with something in him, the one that had always been controlling his emotions now that he was affected. Chloe was able to see through his facade, and it made her feel vulnerable. While Franzheimer struggled with his thoughts, Chloe continued her routine, seeming more distant with each encounter, almost as distant as... When she waited for something, Franzheimer felt as if there was an invisible wall between them, something he could not break through. And it tormented him. He didn't know if it was pride or fear. He was losing control, but something about Chloe attracted him in a way he never could have imagined. You could be different, Franzheimer said to Jack, his comrade who suggested BET over a casual dinner. Usually you. You have everything under control now, but you feel like this woman is challenging you like no other. Franzheimer forced a smile because he was unable to respond immediately. He hated to admit that Jack was right, but it was clear. That night, something changed. Franzheimer returned home, determined to solve the problems he was facing. He had to get Chloe out of his head and remind himself that it was just a contract, nothing more than him. I entered the guest room and found Chloe on the couch reading a book, oblivious to her presence. "We can talk?" asked Franzheimer, breaking the silence that had become the norm between them. Chloe looked up and calmly closed the book, looked at him with a calm but attentive expression. Of course she responded like this. She had been waiting for this moment. Franzheimer sat opposite him and tried to find the right words. The tension between them was great. He felt a palpable sense that he knew he could no longer see this marriage as a mere formality, that something was changing and that he had to do it. "To be honest, what are we doing here, Eva?" he asked sincerely. It even surprised him. It started as a game, a bet, but I don't know what to do. Think about it more. Eva looked at him for a few seconds before responding. "No. I played Franzheimer. It was never me." His voice was calm but full of meaning. "First of all, I agreed to this marriage for reasons that are none of your business. I don't care about the money or your control over it. I'm here for something bigger, and if you haven't noticed yet, maybe it's time to open your eyes." Franzheimer felt a tightness in his chest. It was as if she was telling him a secret. He still couldn't figure it out. Frustration I consumed. "I know you have your secrets, Eva, but what bothers me is, the more I try to understand you, the more I realize I'm not in control, and I hate that he suddenly got up and couldn't. Remain still, as if the weight of this revelation were too heavy to bear." Eva remained calm and watched his every move. She slowly stood up, walked towards him, and stood a few inches away from him. Franzheimer felt his heart race. "Franzheimer," she began, his deep and gentle voice. "It's not about control. You've always lived trying to dominate everything and everyone. But with me, you will have to learn that control is not always the answer. Sometimes things just need to be the way they are." "You are Franzheimer," who looked into her eyes and felt for a moment a connection he had. Never before had he felt like he was seeing Chloe as she was for the first time, and not as a pawn in her game. "So what do you want?" he asked. His voice was softer now, almost a whisper. Chloe smiled, a mysterious smile that gives you goosebumps. "I want you to find out for yourself, Franzheimer," and with that she left, leaving him alone with his thoughts for the next meetings. The distance between them seemed to grow, but in a strange way, Franzheimer felt closer to Chloe than ever. He was obsessed with finding out what she was hiding, what her true intentions were, and at the same time, he felt like he was missing something. He was in control of himself. He didn't want to admit it, but Chloe changed the way he saw the globe, and the idea that she was able to influence him so deeply that she terrified him throughout the 6 months of their marriage. Were almost over, but for Franzheimer Marshall, every meeting he could get seemed like an eternity. He barely slept, and the impending revelation he thought he was about to discover turned his stomach. Eve had become an enigmatic presence in his existence. He saw her not only as the woman he had married on a bet, but also as someone he knew. Something he couldn't understand. The obsession with understanding Chloe was consuming him. He tried everything to understand the secret she kept inside her, but each answer only led to more questions that worried Franzheimer. Investigators looked into his past and followed every possible lead, but everything seemed carefully planned. Eva felt like she was always 2 steps ahead, controlling the game from the start, one night at a time. Business meeting. Franzheimer arrived at the penthouse later than usual. The porch light was on, and Chloe was sitting. As he looked at New York like a queen overseeing her empire, he knew that tonight the moment would come when everything would be perfect. Revealed that Franzheimer felt she was ready to tell him what he desperately wanted to know, but was afraid of what he might. When he heard her, his throat tightened, and when he heard her footsteps, he walked towards her. As the echo reverberated in the silent room, Eva didn't immediately turn around, her ears feeling heavy, almost as if they both knew something. A catastrophe was imminent. "I need answers," said Eva Franzheimer. "Your voice is steady, even when your heart is racing. I can't take this game anymore. You have to tell me the truth." Chloe sighed slowly, and Rose turned from her chair to face him, her normally calm and calculating eyes now showing emotion. Franzheimer could not see that there was anything new in her, something dark and wild. The truth, Franzheimer had a bitter heart. Smile as you cross your arms. You really want the truth." He nodded without hesitation, but tension was in the air. Franzheimer grew bigger every second. Franzheimer prepared himself for every answer, but nothing could have prepared him for anything. He was about to listen. "You have no idea who I am," Chloe began in her charged voice. A chill. "You always saw people as pawns on your chessboard, but this time, Franzheimer, you were the pawn. I've been playing this game since the beginning." Franzheimer felt a shiver run down his spine, the certainty he always had. As he was starting to lose control in front of her, he tried to talk, but Ava wouldn't let him do that to you. "Remember Richard's name," she continued, her voice getting louder and louder. "You obviously don't like people. You never remember that my father owned a small business that struggled to survive until you came along destroyed." Franzheimer rolled his eyes, his mind racing to try and connect the dots. "Points out what?" Franzheimer stuttered, confused about what you are talking about. Eva made a sharp turn, looking at him, his eyes burned with anger and pain. "My father, Franzheimer, he was an honest man who fought to support us kinship, until you arrived and took everything. You ruined him, Franzheimer. He lost everything, and it led to his death." "Chloe." She paused, her voice breaking for a moment before continuing, tears welling in her eyes. "My father committed suicide. Because of your empire, your success achieved the effect of your words at all costs." Franzheimer stood frozen like a punch in the stomach. As memories slowly came back to the surface, there was so much to do. He didn't remember so many contracts, so many lives affected by his greedy hands, all the companies he destroyed to get to the top. But now, suddenly, everything was happening. When Eva returned to chase him, he desperately tried to stop her, but she picked her up. And stopped her. "No," she screamed in her boiling anger. "You have no idea what you didn't just do this for money, Franzheimer, but because you ruined your existence. You took away my father, the only person I was in the world, and while you were doing well, my mother and I were sinking in debt and despair, and you lived your existence in luxury, and we had hardly eaten anything." Franzheimer was completely stunned. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but no words came out. All he could do was stand up. There, I looked at her, the weight of guilt weighing on her chest, but I had planned everything. Chloe continued, "You are more controlled now, but still upset. When I found out about your bet, I saw my chance. I deliberately sought you out and took the bet because I wanted you to feel at least a fraction of what I wanted you to feel. They know what it's like to be manipulated and left powerless." Franzheimer felt his body shaking. He thought he was in control. He always believed he would emerge victorious, but now the situation has changed. It was him, Target and Chloe. The player controlled the entire field, Ava Franzheimer. He started to speak, but his voice was weak. I didn't know it wasn't you." Franzheimer interrupted Chloe and walked over until she was facing him. "I never knew why you didn't care. You destroyed existence without thinking about it. And now I'm here not to destroy you, but to make sure you never forget what you did. I want you to feel the pain you felt, caused, and this pain that Franzheimer will haunt him for the rest of his existence." Chloe's the words fell to him like a sentence. Franzheimer was confronted with something he had never experienced before. As he felt the consequences of his actions, the weight of guilt was overwhelming, and he knew at that moment that he had lost much more than just I bet. He lost something he could never get back. Chloe moved away. Silence echoed throughout the penthouse. Franzheimer felt his legs give way and fell onto the sofa. Without words and without answers, only emptiness remained. Chloe's revelation echoed in Franzheimer's mind. Like an incessant storm, every word she spoke fell apart, piece by piece, the globe he thought he knew. The woman he thought he could manipulate, who he saw as a pawn in his game. Power and bets had just flipped the entire board for the first time. For the first time, Franzheimer didn't know how to react. However, when he was really out of control, Chloe didn't give him time to back down. After revealing the truth about the destruction of his parentage and his father's suicide, she left him alone in his room. Left to his own devices, Franz Heimer remained motionless in the air. As his blanket suffocated, as if everything collapsed around him, he wanted to talk to him, apologize, explain what inexplicable, but the truth is that there were no words. How could he justify something like this, something cruel that caused so much pain in the days following its revelation? Chloe did exactly what Franz Heimer did. What he feared most was that she would completely ignore him, because her presence was a constant reminder of that. His failure, she passed by him as if he were invisible, as if his existence were invisible. Nothing more than a shadow at breakfast, she sat silently, barely looking up when he tried to say his words. Dead in midair, unable to break down the wall she built between them, Franz Heimer, who was responsible. The room that should have been the focus was ignored in the house. The lack of attention was unbearable. Chloe talked to the team, took care of her personal life, but with Franz Heimer it was like that, as if he didn't exist. The weight of this forced silence was slowly destroying the man he thought was Ava. He tried. I called one morning when she was leaving. We needed to talk. She stopped. When he turned his back and straightened his coat, the silence in the air grew heavier, and Franz Heimer waited impatiently for a reaction. Any word, even if it was anger, would have done it. It was better than indifference. But Chloe didn't say anything. She just left. He closed the door softly, leaving Franz Heimer with the echo of the sound in his head, the pain of being ignored by someone he loved. He began to see more than one opponent. This was something new for Franz Heimer. He was used to controlling to win, but now he was the one being manipulated and punished with silence and contempt every time. When she left him alone, the feeling of helplessness grew. This was just the beginning. Chloe didn't stop silently. She began to actively undermine Franz Heimer's trust in the little ones. While working with painful methods, he noticed that important meetings were being postponed without notice. Decisions were suddenly questioned, and projects he had started mysteriously began to fail. He knew that. It was Chloe's fault, even if she never admitted it. Franz Heimer felt her influence with every movement, as if she were pulling him. The invisible threads holding their existence together at home have gotten worse. Worse still, Eve adopted an attitude of absolute contempt and consciously distanced herself from her. To prevent any attempt at reconciliation on Franz Heimer's part, she stopped sitting with him during meals and avoided any conversation. Beyond the superficial, Chloe responded with cold stares as she followed her around and tried to sort things out. His presence was a nuisance. One night, Franz Heimer found her reading a book in the living room. The scene seemed peaceful, but he knew that this moment of calm was a silent trap. He sat on the couch and tried again. "Speak, Ava." Her voice began softly, almost pleadingly. "I know I've done terrible things, things that I know have caused you a lot of pain, but can we please try to find a solution? At least we can speak." Ava slowly closed the book without looking at it. When she finally looked up, her face was so cold, he trembled as he spoke. She probably repeated with a bitter laugh, "There's still something to say. You want words, Luke. After everything you've done, words are the right thing useless. I was wrong, Chloe, I know." Franz Heimer now insisted on getting up. I sit on the couch, desperately getting closer to connection. "I would do anything to fix what I did. I can change. I swear to you." She finally looked at him with her piercing gaze, as if she wanted to challenge him to keep her own promises. She said, getting up slowly, "Do you think? If I change now, everything will be erased. My father will be brought back, and the years we spent in misery because of you will be restored." "No, Franz Heimer doesn't want to go." She approached, and Franz Heimer felt himself sinking, crushed by it. "Intensity of your gaze. What?" you are doing now is not for me, it is for you. What are you going to wear? Franzheimer remained silent about this weight, this guilt, for the rest of his existence. When he first realized there would be no easy redemption or instant forgiveness, he wanted to fight for it. Something that could be fixed, but Chloe was no longer easily fixed. On subsequent dates, Chloe began to increase the intensity of her punishments. Franzheimer received furious looks. Every time he passed by her, he looked down on her, and his frustration turned into despair. He tried in every possible way to show her that he was changing, that he wanted to improve. But each attempt was met with indifference or sarcasm. A night later, a disastrous professional meeting, where an important project was sabotaged. Franzheimer returned home and found Eva. As he laughed into the phone, overheard snippets of the conversation, and realized she was discussing her career choices, he knew that she was the one who destroyed everything Chloe had asked for, but in such a subtle and calculated way that no one but her he would notice, and she would let him suffer in silence when Chloe hung up the phone that Franzheimer was waiting for in the room. He looked at her, his exhausted expression filled with pent-up anger, but also pain. "You're destroying everything, aren't you?" he said, his voice calm but with an obvious tone of frustration at work. "You are destroying my existence." Chloe looked at him with a deadpan expression. "She crossed her arms and destroyed her existence?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I will just return what you gave. Don't worry, Franzheimer. I won't ruin you financially. It would be very easy. I want you to live with the pain. I want you to feel every little loss like I felt, like I wanted you, seeing everything you built collapse with each date, and knowing that it was your fault." Franzheimer felt the ground disappear. Under his feet, it was a nightmare again. He was still the winner, still the man who controlled others, the fate of men. But now he was the target of a cold and meticulous revenge. Chloe didn't want to destroy him all at once. She wanted him to suffer day after day. For every little defeat, for every look he gave her, contempt until all that was left was regret. Weeks passed, and Chloe continued to ignore him and punish him. Franzheimer, once arrogant and self-confident, now roamed around at home like a shadow of himself, trying his best to get a forgiveness he knew would never come. He tried to make amends, but his efforts were always insufficient, trapping him in a cycle of guilt and pain. This cycle, Chloe was in complete control, but the worst was yet to come. One night, Chloe finally confronted him, this time with a coldness that Franzheimer had never seen before. She approached him as if he sat on the couch, exhausted and devastated, and spoke the words that would haunt him. "Forever, Franzheimer, you took something from me that I can never get back," she began, calm but loud voice. "Now I return the favor, and you will be with her and this existence for the rest of your existence." Chloe left him there with nothing left to say that she didn't need. The punishment was already underway, and Franzheimer knew he would never be the same again. Franzheimer Marshall felt trapped in a maze, feelings of guilt and despair. Chloe managed to let him exist as he was. Being out of control in the weeks following Chloe's revelation was unbearable. Franzheimer was no longer the arrogant, self-confident man who believed he was in control of everything around him. He was now a man. Every time he tried to talk to Chloe, he was met with a shadow, a pale reflection of who he was, and cold stares. Ignored and rejected, his indifference swallowed him whole. He no longer slept and could not think of anything except trying to fix what he had broken. But the weight of the truth and the actions of his past made him something. The path seemed almost impossible, but something began to change in Franzheimer. "I realized that your words no longer had any value. Apologies meant nothing, Chloe." He needed a real change, a real transformation, and he was willing to do anything to prove to her that he needed her. Actions, not empty promises. One morning, Franzheimer woke up determined. He knew that he couldn't just ask for forgiveness. He had to do something else. The first step would be to give Chloe space. He had to make sure to respect his time and not put more pressure on him. But he also knew he had to show it. Franzheimer was still there in a subtle but significant way and began to pay attention. He observed the little things that made up Chloe's existence. He observed her dating routines, her likes and dislikes. Not following her didn't mean taking her place, but rather making a mental note of all the flowers she liked, especially the peonies. The smell of his coffee in the morning is always strong, without sugar. These details that were once insignificant were now key to his attempt to reconnect with this. Afterwards, Franzheimer went to one of the best flower shops in the city and bought a bouquet of peonies that he didn't want to buy. Hand them straight to Chloe. He knew she would reject them immediately. Instead, he left the flowers on the kitchen table without a simple but meaningful message. I was eagerly waiting to go for a walk when Chloe came back. She found the bouquet of flowers, but didn't say anything else. Franzheimer watched her from the corner of his eye and saw the expression on her face at the exact moment she stopped in front of the flowers. It didn't change, but he noticed that she picked up one of the flowers and smelled it. It was a small gesture, but for Franzheimer, it was the sign that Chloe wasn't completely rejecting her, was the progress at the time. Franzheimer followed him and continued these small gestures. He carefully set the breakfast table and made his coffee strong enough just the way she liked him. And then, careful not to impose his presence, he left little things that she liked to always have on hand without forcing consultation, or he spoke slowly, trying to show that he had changed, that he was paying attention, that he was himself. Wanted to take care of Chloe, but Chloe still didn't give up. She kept the wall between them, and Franzheimer knew she would break down. It would take time to break through this barrier, but he wouldn't give up. He gave up, determined to show her that he was different, that he could win her back, but on his terms and with respect for her. The space she needed. It was on a particularly cold night that things began to change. Chloe was on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket and looking at the city lights. Franzheimer approached her after some hesitation. I brought her a cup of hot tea because I knew she liked to drink something hot before bed. I thought you would like it. Chloe said something hot while keeping her voice calm, without forcing her presence, didn't say anything at first, but picked up the cup, still looking at the city in front of her. Franzheimer was next to her. They stayed quiet and just tried to be present without intruding. The silence between them was tense, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel unbearable. It was like something was changing, even if it was barely noticeable. Why are you doing this? Franzheimer Eva finally broke the silence. Her voice was gentle but firm. Franzheimer knew it was like this. He had the chance to speak, but he had to be careful. He took a deep breath before answering. Because I realized that talking doesn't mean anything anymore, he started. Looking at the horizon with her. My words don't matter what I did. This can't be solved with excuses, but I'm trying to show that I'm changing. I want to be a better person, not just because you, but because I realized it had to be me. Ava remained silent a few more times. For a few seconds, I still held the cup of tea, the cold wind blowing through it, but the tension seemed to ease a little. It can't be changed. Passing by Franzheimer, she finally said, I know him, in a softer voice than he expected. I answered sincerely, but I can change the future. Chloe saw it for the first time. That night, Franzheimer saw something different. There was hardness in his eyes was still there, but there was a spark of curiosity. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely. He knew that, but it was a pivotal moment when he mentioned something she would like to believe in post-Franzheimer encounters. He continued his small gestures, but now there was a different energy between them. Chloe has always kept her distance. But she no longer rejected him as openly as before when she accepted the flowers from the cups, tea, and even allowed him to speak to him during breakfast, albeit briefly and superficially, which were barriers it began to decline, albeit slowly. But the real test came one night when Franz Heimer was about to leave. He was dressed for a meeting for another professional assignment when Chloe entered the room wearing a facial expression that he couldn't read correctly. "Can you cancel your appointment?" she asked suddenly. Franz Heimer looked at her in surprise. She has never shown any interest in their whereabouts since the relationship ended. He hesitated, then nodded, picked up the phone and cancelled the meeting without thinking about it. "I thought it was the first time in weeks that Chloe seemed willing to spend time with him, and he didn't want to miss out on that." On that occasion, they sat on the sofa a little far from each other. But for the first time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Chloe seemed thoughtful, as if she was contemplating everything that was happening. "It happened in the last few months. I'm not ready to forgive you completely, Ava. I said break the silence, but you show me something else I see. You try, and maybe it's the start of something." Franz Heimer felt his heart race. He couldn't rush. He knew that. But Chloe's words were enough to keep his hope alive. He knew the path forward would be... It would take a long time, but he was willing to take any step if it meant earning her forgiveness and perhaps her love that night. The two continued to talk peacefully about insignificant things, but for Franz Heimer, it was a victory. He started slowly rebuilding something with patience. Chloe was no longer an untouchable figure, She was starting to let her guard down, and Franz Heimer wouldn't make the mistake of underestimating her again while she was still here. A shadow hung over them. Franz Heimer knew that Chloe hadn't revealed everything, but there was something that was still her. Wait, and he had to be ready to face it. But for now, the acting thing. The fact that Chloe was willing to talk was enough for the next few weeks. The silence was a mix of tension, and I hope that for the first time in a long time, Franz Heimer felt like he was making progress with Chloe and that she stopped treating him absolutely cold, but it also didn't open completely. There was a hesitation in the air, a kind of waiting that made him nervous. He knew he was being tested and he was ready, which he didn't know he was, that something much greater would be revealed. Franz Heimer dedicated himself to proving to Chloe that he was the one prison guard. Ed ditched his work commitments to spend more time at home and make sure he was there for them without pressuring him or demanding immediate responses. Small gestures like having breakfast together or talking about small things in the evening gradually became part of their routine. Eat ice. The relationship between them began to melt, and Franz Heimer realized that Chloe no longer treated him the same way. Disdain, but despite the progress he felt, something still bothered him. Chloe kept a secret. At times she remained secretive and avoided deeper conversations about the past or the future, seemed to be waiting for the right moment to say something. But Franz Heimer didn't know what it was at that moment. Quiet night as the rain lightly tapped the roof windows. Franz Heimer noticed a change in Chloe's attitude. Her demeanor seemed more thoughtful and distant than usual, as if she were lost in thought. He tried not to press her, but his curiosity was eating away at him. What she hid, what had not yet been said, when the silence finally became unbearable, Franz Heimer broke the barrier. "Ava," he began in a low voice, almost full of fear. "I know there's still something between us that you haven't told me and that I can feel." He looked into her eyes, waiting for the slightest sign of her reaction. "Please, if there is anything you are still hiding, I need to know that." Chloe, sitting on the couch with her hands folded in her lap, took a deep breath first. He avoided Franz Heimer's gaze, and the silence that followed was torturous, but Franz Heimer knew him. He had to be patient. He knew that anything he forced now could undo all the progress he had made. After all, she was looking at him. His eyes reflected a mixture of pain and determination. "You are right, Franz Heimer," she said, soft voice but full of emotions. "I hid something I thought I couldn't tell you until now, but perhaps it's time for Franz Heimer to feel the air tightening around him, whatever that may be." He knew this would change everything. He leaned forward a little and waited for the revelation to come, but also for fear of what he might hear. "Do you remember that company you destroyed, the one my father ran, Chloe founded? You stand firm, but your expression shows deep pain. I told you that you were destroyed, our relatives, and that's true, but that's not all you destroyed that Franz Heimer saw." She was confused. "What do you mean?" he asked Chloe in a worried voice. He looked down, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. When she finally spoke again, her voice was almost calmer. A whisper, "I was pregnant with Franz Heimer." These words hit Franz Heimer like a crushing burden. He blinked, trying to understand what he had just heard, but he couldn't believe it, which he whispered in a daze. "I was pregnant at the time it all happened," continued Eva, still looking field. "And when we lost everything, when my father was away, the pressure and the stress of it all, I lost the baby." Franz Heimer felt as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. He couldn't, barely. Breathing. The impact of the revelation hit him like a punch to the gut, something he would never be able to do. He imagined that the guilt he had been feeling and tormenting him for weeks seemed to be getting even stronger. He destroyed not only a business, not only a relationship, but also an existence. "Ever," he tried to say, but the voice was muffled. "It wasn't me. I could never imagine." She finally looked at him, and the tears she had been holding back were now streaming down her face. Although her face was marked with pain, there was an undeniable force within her. "No, you didn't know," Eva said, her voice full of power. "Pain and resentment because you never wanted to know that you destroyed existence, Franz Heimer. And you didn't even look at the people in your path. I lost my baby, and you continued your existence as if nothing had happened." It turned out that his words cut Franz Heimer like knives. He wanted to do something, say something, that he could make amends for what he had done, but he knew that nothing he said or did would undo what Chloe had been through. "I miss the words that Franz Heimer finally managed to say. His voice was weak and full of despair. "I know what I did. Unforgivable, and I will never forgive myself, but please, Eva, I will do everything I can to try and make things right." Whatever it was. Chloe looked at him for a long moment, and the silence that followed was oppressive. Franz Heimer knew he was saying nothing. Could bring the baby back or make amends for the past, but he was desperate for a way to ease at least some of Chloe's pain. Finally, it was as if Chloe took a deep breath and closed her eyes, as if she were doing when she opened them again. Her expression had changed. The pain was still there, but it was there, something else, something that Franz Heimer could not identify. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Franz Heimer," she said honestly. "What you did, what was happening, was devastating." But she paused, as if considering her next words. "I can see you trying, and maybe there's a chance you can find a way to advance a date, but that it won't be easy. It won't be quick." Franz Heimer nodded and felt a mixture of hope and despair. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but at least Chloe was willing to consider the possibility of a different future. "I will do whatever is necessary, Franz Heimer," replied his voice full of debt, and concluded, "No matter how long it takes, I will prove to you that I changed this. I can be someone you trust, someone you can maybe forgive for a date." Chloe watched. For the first time, there was a small opening for him. It wasn't complete forgiveness. It wasn't the end of everything. It hurt, but it was a start. "We'll see," said Eva with a sigh calmly. "Let's see if you can do it." The silence that followed between them was heavy, but also full of possibilities. Chloe got up and walked out the door, leaving Franz Heimer alone on the couch, but this time he didn't feel the same. He was still desperate, and knew he had a long journey ahead of him, but at least for now, there was hope that the dates after Chloe's revelation meant a change for Franz Heimer, every word she uttered. This weighed heavily on him as he felt guilty for all the pain he caused, but instead, Franz Heimer delved into his regrets and decided that pain and guilt would be his fuel. When he changed, he didn't just want to win back Chloe's love, he wanted to become a man worthy of her respect. Respect from many people he hurt throughout his tireless business career. This morning, Franz Heimer made the decision not to sit idly by and let the past condemn him forever. I would do it again, and the first step would be to repair as much damage as possible to prove to Chloe that he, after his existence truly changed, he began tracking down relatives whose existence had been destroyed by his business. His first visit was to the relatives of a former competitor whose business he had ruined years ago. Arrived unexpectedly and knocked on the door of a modest house in a neighborhood far from the luxury of his home. In his own existence, the man who opened the door was a stranger to Franz Heimer, but the pain in his eyes was familiar. "My name is Franz Heimer Marshall." Franz Heimer said in his voice full of sincerity that he badly recognized, "I'm here to apologize." The man looked at him for a while. A long moment of disbelief is clearly visible in his eyes. "Sorry," he laughs bitterly. "What is this?" "That will change now. I cannot change the past," replied Franz Heimer firmly, "but I can try to help. Rebuild the future. I'm here to offer compensation to help fix what I destroyed in the next few weeks." Franz Heimer. He continued his journey of salvation, knocking on doors, meeting relatives, and offering not only money, but also his time. In an effort to truly understand the impact of his actions, he began donating large sums of money to small businesses that had suffered injustice. For her business maneuvers, creating turnaround programs to help other entrepreneurs rebuild, Chloe noted. From a distance, she observed Franz Heimer's behavior warily at first and knew he was trying to change. But forgiveness would not be easy for her. As the dates passed and Franz Heimer presented a real transformation, she began. She felt something new in him, a new respect and admiration. But she didn't expect him to change, and he did. Proves that his words were no longer meaningless. One night, Chloe sat on the porch and looked at the city lights. When Franz Heimer approached her calmly, he had just returned from another of his conciliatory visits, and the expression on his face. It was different, now calmer, more determined. How was it today? Eva continued to ask. Franz Heimer looked at the horizon and let out a deep sigh that cost him months of effort and regret. Although he admitted necessary, every conversation, every excuse is a step towards becoming a better person. "Not only for you, Eva, for me too." She finally turned to him. There was something different in his eyes, including the hardness he always had. The anger she felt seemed to have subsided at that moment. She saw that Franz Heimer was truly changing. He was no longer the arrogant man who came into her existence betting on it. Someone who fights to be different. Someone who is willing to fight for themselves. I can see what Franz Heimer said to Eva in his soft voice, but firmly, and I want you to know that I'm willing to try. Maybe it's time to leave the past behind and build something new. Franz Heimer felt a wave of relief because he didn't even know he was waiting for these words that meant more to him than to him. I would have imagined that Chloe was willing to give them a chance, not as a couple bound together by a bet, but as two. A surprising thing happened to people who were ready to start over when their 6-month marriage contract ended. Chloe and Franz Heimer became closer. Their conversations became less formal and less tense. They shared moments of laughter. And the connection, and slowly, the love began to blossom in ways neither of them had imagined. Hoped they would no longer be the separated couple trapped in an arranged marriage. Well, they were two people who met in an authentic and sincere way. one night when the semester was coming to an end. Standing on the sidelines, and Franz Heimer had prepared a special dinner. He knew that this moment would be decisive. They had come so far, and I didn't want the marriage to end there, Ava, he said over dinner, his voice filled with a nervousness he didn't have. I feel like I know our deal is almost over, but I don't want that to happen. The end, I don't want us to end. I really fell in love with you, Ava, and I want... We continued, but now Ava was looking at him like a real couple. No bets, no games. Surprised by the sincerity of his words, but also by the affection, she realized that she also felt something for him. Something that had been quietly developing over the past few weeks. They started out as enemies, but were now lovers. I love you too, in a deep and real way, Franz Heimer told Chloe in a gentle but firm voice. I want to try. I want to build something with you, but this time it's like a real couple. These moments were pure. Luckily for both of them, they overcame obstacles that once seemed impossible and were now ready to do so. Months later, as Eva moved along, she noticed something different. She felt nausea all over her body in the morning, which she was not used to. It was only after taking a test that she was sure she was pregnant when Chloe told Franz Heimer that her reaction was pure joy. I hugged them, laughing and crying at the same time, for everything they had been through, all the pain and suffering they were experiencing now, seemed to lead to this moment of renewal. They were ready to later begin a new existence together with a new kinship. This time I want to do everything right, said Franz Heimer, who knew exactly what he had to do. I want to marry you again, but this in real time, not because of a bet, not for any other reason than because I love you and want to spend my existence with you. Ava, she smiles. Her tears of happiness mix with his. I want that too, Franz Heimer. She replied, that this time it would be a real wedding, a new beginning, his new marriage. It was an intimate celebration with comrades and close relatives, without superficial glamour, without rash deals or gambling. Just Chloe and Franz Heimer, united by true love, ready to look to the future together. Franz Heimer. He knew he still had a lot to prove, not just to Chloe, but to himself and the relatives he slept with in the past. But now he had what it took to fight for a new life with the woman he loved and the child. And they were expecting. The time he was determined to be the man Chloe deserved and the father her son would need, as they slow danced. At the end of the ceremony, Chloe placed her head on Franz Heimer's chest and whispered, "Who knew it all started with a bet?" Franz Heimer smiled as he hugged her. Who knew it would be that the best bet I've ever made, and with a future full of love, redemption, and hope they have, were ready for the next chapter of their existence. What do you think Chloe did? The right decision to forgive and marry Franz Heimer. Share your thoughts with us in the comments. We would love to know more about yours. If this story touched your heart, know that your participation means a lot to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.